So joined here at this table by Larimer County Sheriff Justin Smith, who is back from March 20th roundtable at the White House on sanctuary cities. You and other law enforcement officers who are generally supportive of the president's position met with him to talk about this issue. As a law enforcement officer, what do you see as the practical, not the symbolic threats posed by sanctuary cities?
Well, good questions, Kyle. You know, the general issues that you have is essentially you're putting law enforcement officers potentially in a position to obstruct government operations for what Immigrations and Customs Enforcement does. And there are some serious unintended consequences of doing that. For one example, in jurisdictions that do this, a police officer can be punished up to including termination from their job simply for sharing information they have with federal immigration officials. On other extremes, we see areas in California where Border Patrol has talked about having Border Patrol agents that are left hanging in a dangerous situation because the local police may be punished by their employers or by the state criminal system for showing up to assist an immigration officer if immigration was the reason that they came to assist them in the beginning.
What would be the harm, in your view, of letting local jurisdictions or letting states each take their own approach, provided that it does not violate federal law? So federal law specifies you must cooperate to this extent. But if Larimer County wants to cooperate more than the city and county of Denver, what would be the harm?
I think the biggest thing is what we're talking about isn't so much the cooperation directly, it's that you're putting local governments and state governments in where they're actually obstructing the federal operation, not choosing how much they can or can't help. I think that's the way things have happened for years. It depends on the resources I've got. I can't always guarantee to any other agency what assistance I can give them, but I never get put in a position of obstructing their operations. That's actually what we're seeing is those consequences of one government obstructing another, and needless to say, that's a dangerous and slippery slope to start down.
What is the sanctuary that a place like Denver provides that Larimer County does not?
Well, some of the practical realities under Mayor Hancock's policies are really obstructing immigration agents from being able to come to the jail or maybe the courthouse and conduct business.
They can't make an arrest inside the jail or inside the courthouse where they say that it's safer.
We're actually seeing where they're treated different than other federal law enforcement. It's a politicizing because there's no rule that says that the FBI can't come in and take care of business. There's no rule that says that if the DEA has an investigation, they have to get a warrant before they can talk to an inmate in the jail. But those are the kind of policies we see in place against ICE. And so those are the weird things that are coming out in this, and that's where when the rubber meets the road, that's where the practical problems are, and it's pitting officers against each other, and potentially creating some of those dangers to the public.
You'll hear folks in Denver say that somebody who is here illegally is not going to interface with police, even if it's to save other people's lives, if they fear that you are an arm of federal immigration. You see that in Larimer County?
I think that's an argument that's really been rebuffed over time. The reality is that individuals who are here who may have immigration issues, who are a witness to a crime, are currently protected under two programs. One's called a U visa and another's called a T visa for a victim of certain crimes or human trafficking, where there's programs out there, and we know because we get the paperwork on a regular basis for a victim, a cooperating victim or witnessing a crime, to stave off any sort of deportation proceedings. So there are some protections. What's frustrating is, interestingly, immigration advocates and the ACLU can be the ones to stir up that fear. Local police aren't stirring that up, but others that claim to be working to help the immigrant community will place that fear. I put the challenge to them. I said, look, why don't you put that information out that if you're in that situation, you can and oftentimes will be protected from deportation because of that status. So I think there are protections already there, Kyle.
One of the big issues that the ACLU has been involved in is the idea of ICE detainers, which I think simply stated for people is just when federal immigration agents want you, Sheriff Smith, to hold somebody in your jail after they bond out so that ICE can come and get them. Do you do that in Larimer County? Hold somebody after they bond out so that federal agents can come get them?
Well, and that's where this really came out in 2014. The original case that was a turning point for sheriffs was out of Oregon, Clackamas County. And in that case that came out, Oliveris versus Clackamas, what was clarified was those civil procedures of that civil deportation process, which is legal and legitimate, is very narrowly put under the authority of ICE. So the challenge to sheriffs is that you can't hold beyond what your charges allow. Some states grant extra authority, Colorado does not. So us, for example, we share information with ICE, we assist them. If I have an inmate who's on a sentence with a known release date, then we share that with immigration officials so they can make that meetup. But as far as somebody who bonds pre-trial, the courts have been very clear and continue to be clear, unless there's a different procedure under a specific contract with ICE, that I can't hold beyond the period that they're done with that state part. So we cooperate with immigration officials, but we also have to make sure the Fourth Amendment is honored. And I think that's the challenge that we continue to face, is how that process is going to work.
Judging by Twitter and my email, there are a lot of people who agree with you on immigration policy who have absolutely no idea how ICE detainers work and think that somehow conservative sheriffs are doing it wildly different than progressive sheriffs. You're describing an ICE detainer situation in which you think the law is pretty clear no matter where you stand ideologically. Is that fair?
Well, what I've actually been surprised on, whether it's the pundits on television or advocates on either side of the issue, I'm amazingly surprised how few people seem to understand that big picture. And in that, it took sheriffs a while. It took me a lot of digging and understanding to figure out how the civil immigration part works, because it's really the only situation that I'm aware of where somebody not charged with a criminal offense can be detained and held into a detention facility. So it's a little difficult to wrap your arms around. I even offer, it took some challenges with U.S. attorneys to get an understanding through them. So it's a difficult situation on both sides.
There has long been a federal program that allows local law enforcement to work hand in hand with ICE. Kind of went dormant under the Obama administration. President Trump wants to bring it back. Nobody in Colorado is participating in this program. If you're supportive of the president's stance on immigration, why not join that program?
Well, from a practical standpoint, it's called the 287G program. And with that, it does a couple of things. One, it requires an agency to send a number of employees for 1 week of training. So that can be cost prohibitive for agencies to send them out of state to go to this training. Secondly, you have equipment, and just there's a lot of extra things being done. It essentially turns that employee to an immigration agent, and they're actually going through interviewing individuals to try to determine what their status is. The reality is we're seeing a move towards what they're commonly calling a 287G light, or a warrant service officer program, where if that detainer paperwork is issued by Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, if an agency had those folks trained in the warrant service officer, they could technically serve that and then turn into a contractor for up to 48 hours to make that hold. Really no different than how detainees are held here in Denver. The detention facilities are privately run. They're under contract with ICE. So it's a very technical piece, but there's a discussion, can you do it that way? That requires only 8 hours of training in what they're proposing. It's not out there yet, but it's a program they're looking at. So again, I think it's a smarter way to go about that. And keep in mind, Kyle, what we're really talking about, we aren't talking about individuals on the street who simply have an immigration violation. We're talking about individuals who are already in custody, accused or convicted of another crime, and some of them with very heinous crimes and significant histories.
We've talked about a lot of practical issues, want to end on a broader scope issue. Do you think Colorado would be better off if the people living here illegally were gone, deported, removed, voluntarily left?
Well, I think what it really comes down to is, as a sheriff, it's a rule of law issue. If we have laws on the books, they should be followed, they should be enforced. Obviously, we haven't
The law says they should go. Well, I mean, that's what the law says. So I'm asking you, do you think that would be beneficial for our state?
Here's my piece of it, Kyle. What it comes down to is, if we want these individuals to be here, the law has to change. And as a law enforcement officer, whether I agree or disagree with laws, it's my job to enforce them. So as long as the law says that, we're in a position, at the very least, we should not obstruct immigration officers. We should not create a dangerous situation to make a political point.
Sheriff Justin Smith, thank you for coming in and sharing your views. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you, Kyle.